David Cole, thank you so much for joining us. So you saw this ruling written by this federal judge in Florida this afternoon blocking the mask mandate, something we've all been used to for 2 years already, and it was just extended until May 3rd. So first, what do you make of this?
Well, there are two parts to the judge's ruling. The first part is really focused on the recent extension of the mask mandate that's taken place against the background of COVID becoming less of a problem with the spread of vaccination and everything that had been before. So in one part of the opinion, the judge focuses on the extension of the mask mandate and says, I'm not really sure about this. There's certain requirements that an agency like CDC has to go through to make a new rule. I don't think all the proper procedures were followed. And there's so many exceptions in this new extension that I'm not sure your reasoning stands up. The phrase in administrative law is arbitrary and capricious. So the judge basically compared this most recent ruling about the mandate by CDC, the extension of it in the most recent pronouncement by CDC, and said, administrative agencies just have to check certain boxes to have effective regulation. I don't think all the boxes were checked here. The other holding reached by the judge goes as a broader one about CDC's authority in this area generally. And it goes through the public health statute that creates CDC and gives it regulatory power and questions whether it really has as much power as everyone sort of has assumed it has in the area of mask regulation. She argues in her opinion that CDC's power is really limited in this area only to quote unquote sanitation, and questions whether you can really draw a connection between sanitation power and mask wearing. That's going to be more controversial because I'm not sure that people are ready to just sort of let CDC not have any authority in this area. So there are two distinct holdings, one more general and perhaps more troubling to CDC in the long run. The other one focused at this very specific recent decision by CDC that extended the mask mandate for some while still.
So let me ask you, I guess, because a lot of people who are at the airport, people who are taking a bus in the next day or maybe later today are wondering, okay, well, does this mean I can hop on a plane, hop on a train, hop on a bus without having to wear my mask because what this judge just decided?
Yeah, so there's a little bit of time to implement an order like this. The CDC was handed the situation back by the judge. It said, take further proceedings consistent with my order. I would expect CDC very quickly to come out with new guidelines that are going to be consistent with what the judge said here. Until it does that, you may have a little reluctance by airports and airlines and whatnot to actually change their policies. They'll say, we're just waiting for CDC to tell us and give us the go. On the other hand, if you have this opinion in your hand and you take off your mask, I mean, it's very unlikely anyone's really going to prosecute you for that. So there's a little bit of gray area, and there's going to be some uncertainty while we get the new guidelines in place and make sure everybody knows what they're doing. But in the near future, I would expect you to not be wearing a mask in the airport or bus station or what have you. Now, that said, the government may decide to appeal this to the 11th Circuit and seek an emergency order, putting the mandate back in place. They've got to make that decision very soon, and CDC may wait a little bit on what it does with its regulation while it knows more about the litigation. But it would be unwise for it to wait too long because the judge has made very clear what her view is about the legality of this order.
So there's a lot to unpack on what you said. As first, if somebody decides not to wear a mask, and you said it's probably unlikely that they would be prosecuted for that. Can you explain why?
Well, so you right now you have a situation where the mask mandate by CDC is still on the books. That's still their regulation. But you've had a judge say that's no good. You need to take it back and do something else consistent with my opinion. So you have this little interim period where that regulation is still there, but it's the walking dead. It's not really enforceable. So administratively, the many organizations like airports, airlines, bus lines that basically make their policy by copying what CDC says are sort of waiting so they can incorporate that and put it into effect. But on the other hand, we all know what it's going to say. It's going to say what the judge said here. So the formal recognition by CDC of this in a new set of regulations and guidelines for airports may take it a little while administratively to put out. On the other hand, we all know what it's going to say. It's it's going to say you don't have to wear a mask. So if someone asserts their rights to not wear a mask, they're going to have a solid legal basis for doing that, given what the judge said here. There's going to be some confusion for a little while we get some new rules in place, is all I would point out.
So the ball is in CDC's court for them to figure out what it wants, what they want to do.
They need to make a clear statement to everyone who relies on them for guidance that says, here's what we're doing in light of this order. Here's what our expectations are of you. And by the way, here's what we think may happen if we decide to appeal the case, or so on and so forth. But they have to respond to what the judge has said, and they have to give guidance to the many organizations that are looking to them to kind of be the leader on this. You can't expect everybody out there to automatically revise their policies. They've all been looking for CDC as the leader. They're going to do what CDC tells them to do, and we all know what CDC is going to have to do. It just has to formally go through that and say it in a way that is consistent with the way it does other regulations in this area.
And so what does this mean for airline employees, or, bus drivers, or people who work, train conductors, et cetera? They're going to have to, I know some of the airline employees have been saying, we want this mandate to be ended because of all the violence that we've seen.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll just have to go along with it, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same. We're in the same situation here practically as if CDC a few weeks ago had just decided, well, no more mask mandate. I mean, once you either have it or you don't. And now we have a decision that says, no, you don't. And people are just going to have to deal with that and fold it into their business plans and their practical plans for how they go about running their businesses or running their bus if they're a bus driver, and so on and so forth. You have to do that one way or the other. There's got to be some decision made. And the judge here has said CDC just can't have done what they did. Could other courts disagree with that? Yes. And we could see something come out of this like we saw with the vaccination cases and these OSHA regulations, where a lot of cases work their way up and potentially even require the involvement of the Supreme Court. But as of today, we have a judge that has stated something that she wants to be applied nationally, and CDC is going to have to deal with that in the very near future by giving new guidance to its constituents across the country.
Final question, and that is the Justice Department has to decide right now whether they're going to appeal or just leave it up to CDC to figure this out, right?
That's right. CDC has to do something. What CDC does is, of course, influenced by how hard they and the federal government, or how hard they and the Justice Department want to fight on appeal. So if they decide to appeal and appeal aggressively, seeking an emergency order from the 11th Circuit, actively trying to get a higher court involved in this, they've still got to act. But if they go to the 11th Circuit tomorrow and successfully get an order, that changes what they need to do. So part of CDC's response is going to be tied in with, well, what are we going to do about the litigation? Practically, it's very hard to move something on a day, 2-day turnaround in the courts. They're just not designed to operate that quickly. So even if they decide to appeal and appeal aggressively, they're going to have to acknowledge the existence of this order for the period of time it takes to take an appeal. So, but some very quick decisions have to be made by CDC and CDC's legal counsel about whether they want to press on in court or whether they just want to back off. That's a tough decision that they're going to have to spend a little time thinking through.